This program, while curated to help you improve your health, contains general advice and should not replace the individual advice of your medical practitioner.
Yoga has been a really big tool for me for so many shifts in my life. There's so many different layers to be curious to and to explore in a yoga practice. What I love about it is it invites each person into the conversation of bringing themselves back together. What's beautiful about the female physiology is that we have a really unique perspective into our physiology through our cycle. Our hormones, as I think most women probably have experienced, are everything. They create literally how we feel.
In life, it's normal to have ups and downs. But what do we do when we get stuck? I've always been fascinated by the healing journey. Why do some people get better while others fail to make the shift? Welcome to the Season 2 Expert Series, where you'll meet 24 of the world's leaders in health discussing their passions and what it takes to make a shift.
We tend to be our harshest critics.
We are more than the muscle and bones in our body.
Whoa, that's so opposite of what I was taught growing up.
I would like a call to arms for women to know that their intuition isn't lying to them.
I'm Katherine Maslen, and this is The Shift. Hi, I'm Katherine Maslen, naturopath, author, and host of The Shift. In the Expert Series, we share the insights, stories, and expertise of each of our amazing experts. We're talking doctors, authors, naturopaths, researchers, and thought leaders. You may have heard them on Season 2 of The Shift, where we took snippets of these interviews to put them together in the series for you. If you haven't listened to Season 2 yet, I'd highly recommend checking out Episode 1, which will give you an overview of what constitutes women's hormonal health and a sneak peek into the series. We'll provide a link in the show notes. Tiffany Cruikshank is the founder of Yoga Medicine, a community of teachers focused on fusing Western medicine and research with traditional yoga practices to serve medical communities. She has trained thousands of teachers around the world, graced the cover of over 15 magazines, been featured regularly in major media outlets, and is the author of 2 books, Optimal Health for a Vibrant Life and Meditate Your Weight. With a background in Chinese medicine, acupuncture, and sports medicine, Tiffany has worked with celebrities, athletes, and corporate professionals alike in her own private clinics and at Nike World Headquarters. And if this was not enough, she is also the founder of the non-profit organisation Yoga Medicine Sabre, which raises money to provide education and opportunity to human traffic survivors in India. I love Tiffany's holistic approach to wellness, and she has some absolute gold to share with us in this interview. Let's begin. Tiffany, thank you so much for joining me as one of our experts on The Shift. I would love if you would begin with telling me a little bit about who you are and your story of how you got to where you are today.
Well, first off, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. The abbreviated version, I guess, because as we all know, there can be a long story. I started practicing when I was in my really early teens. And so you can imagine, as many people probably felt in their early teens, I was lost, I was struggling, probably had all sorts of hormones raging in my body. But I went off on a wilderness program that really, I guess you could say, clarified things for me. It started to create a little bit of purpose for me. I met an herbalist there, and he would take me out on plant walks, and it was just so astounding and inspiring to be able to learn how to use the medicine in our local environment and really to be able to find everything that we need there. And I found yoga soon after. It was like just a little board with yoga and a phone number on it that we drove by all the time. And at the time I was 14, I couldn't even drive yet. But one day I remembered it and started going. And for me, I think yoga was very similar. It was this tool that was kind of built into my body. And growing up really physically active and competitive in different sports and more physical modalities, I think what drew me in initially really was that physicality. But like many people, I think what kept me interested over the past 27 years now or so is really the other layers, right? The more interesting stuff. I think we'll talk about a little bit as we go as well, but there's so many different layers to be curious to and to explore in a yoga practice. The physical practices, the mind or the breath, or looking at how it influences our physiology. So I was really eager to learn. I was kind of over high school. I never really liked high school personally, but I quickly finished up and went to college at 16 to eager to study. I did my pre-med in undergrad degree in medicinal plant biology. And while I was there, I was teaching yoga at the time. So I started teaching when I went away to college at 16 because there really wasn't any there. So I realized it was my job just to learn how to do it. And when I was in college, I apprenticed with an acupuncturist who was also a Zen monk, and he worked at the yoga studio I taught at. And I just fell in love with traditional Chinese medicine. It really, for me, made sense of the body and felt like part of this interconnected whole rather than treating all the different parts. And I was, looking at all different forms of medicine, trying to find where I might land and start to practice and study. And that one really just felt like it clicked for me. So I finished my undergrad, and then I went off and did medicinal plant biology, and then went off to Chinese medicine school for 4 years. And really just loving that physical background, I went into specialize in sports medicine and orthopedics, which was really intriguing, and opened up my own clinic probably like the day after I got my license. And then I had the opportunity to go and work with a really well-known MD in New York, Dr. Frank Lipman, and got to study with him there and see a lot of celebrities and professional athletes. It was such a great opportunity so early in my career. And then I moved back to Portland. I got a great opportunity to start up the traditional Chinese medicine program at the Nike headquarters in Portland. And I decided to move back there and run that. And I taught yoga there too, and yoga for their athletes. And yeah, and so eventually my career kind of shifted more towards teaching yoga. But I love the mix of them both. For me, they're both just different tools in the tool belt, and all just really important ways of kind of fine-tuning our experience in the world.
So it sounds like once you went into that world, you were kind of hooked. What was it around TCM and yoga and all the things that you were learning that really hooked you in and resonated with you?
Yeah, I think for me, it was really just this ability to start to intervene in my own inner workings and inner process, and noticing how everything that I do with my body, everything that I put in my body is affecting me, is affecting not only how I feel physically, but mentally, how I'm interacting with people. For me, yoga is I really often think of it as like the foundation of our healthcare, because it gives us a deeper sense of our body awareness so that we can really be more conscious of what's happening. And for me, that's kind of the baseline that's needed to start to do the investigation, whether I'm talking about working with professional athletes, or whether I'm talking about someone who just wants to feel better or have more focus, or maybe working with an injury. I really have to be able to notice how things are affecting me. And so whether I'm going to a Western medicine practitioner or an acupuncturist or a yoga teacher, that information that I can collect is so informative, because then I can decide what's helping, right? It sounds really obvious out loud, but I think that body awareness is so pivotal to everything we do in our health and wellness. And so I think just first unlocking that, but then having these tools to influence and affect so many different layers, I think has just always been really intriguing to me.
The awareness piece, I think, is something worth talking about a little bit more, because the first step to someone making a change or making a shift in any way is really being aware that there is a problem, or that there's a certain state that they're in that they want to change. Can you tell me a little bit about why you think people are so disconnected from their bodies, why they have this lack of awareness, and then what do they need to do to bring that back?
I think part of it is probably just the busyness of our lives. It's easier. We have so many things coming at us any time of the day, all the things that we're focusing. I know for me especially, that it's easier just to tune out and try and focus on what we need to. And I think, we go through a world that's kind of focused externally, our computers or our whatever's in front of us. And so it's easier to focus on those things than it is to be aware of what's happening in the body. But I think, and maybe there's probably some subconscious connections here as well, I'm sure, of maybe even not wanting to acknowledge what's happening there. It's easier sometimes, especially if we don't like what we find there. Perhaps there's some little strings of, I think we put a lot of weight on our own shoulders, right? I think a lot of people tend towards this perfectionism, and it's difficult to start to look inward and see these underpinnings of imperfections inside of us. Even just in a yoga practice, of being able to kind of sit and notice and just watch the mind wander. It's easy to judge ourselves and to maybe start to beat ourselves up just on the simple things, much less noticing how we feel. And it's easy to come to sit at our desk. I think one thing I find a lot of is it's really easy to sit at our desk and try to push aside all of these maybe aches or pains or these kind of tinier things, the smaller things of our health that we might not go to see a doctor for. But when we start yoga, it's pretty common for people to start bringing some of these things to the surface and then wanting to work on them. That's why I really loved when I first started seeing patients. I saw a lot of people who were yoga students of mine. And, I always said it wasn't necessarily that yoga was injuring them, but it was more just that it was bringing things to the surface that, they didn't want to let go. They didn't want to just leave it to kind of linger for years. And I think it kind of invites you into this proactive conversation to investigate and watch the cause and effect.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because when people say to me, so I recommend yoga often, I think it's such an amazing intervention on so many different levels. But when people say to me, I hate yoga, I can't do yoga, my first thought is, you really need to do yoga.
My husband still says that to me. He's like, we were practicing actually just a couple hours ago. And he's like, they just don't make it easy for men. I was like, well, maybe that's why you need it. He's able to do it. He's just so hard on himself. But I agree. I think especially I've worked a lot with athletes, and with athletes, it's challenging, but the people who are tight, like that's what their body needs. It's not that they need to look a certain way. The problem is we get so attached to the photos and the pictures that are just meant to be a guide point. And we try and force ourselves into these postures instead of allowing it to be your own pose, be what serves you.
Let's talk about that a little bit more, about the culture of yoga being about hot yoga pants and perfection. And what does yoga really mean? I mean, you've been working in this field for 27 years. What does yoga mean to you?
Well, I mean, if you think about the meaning of yoga itself, it really just breaks down to union. So this idea of to join. And so for me, I really think of it a lot about bringing ourselves back together and connecting these what often feel like very fragmented parts of ourselves that live, at any given time of the day in maybe 5 different parts of our lives or even our body. And so not only bringing together the parts of our body, I feel this a lot in my own practice, this kind of sense of separation and this ability to kind of bring this awareness through our nervous system, through our fascia back online so that it feels like a continuous whole, but then also that connection of bringing the mind and the body back together. And then I think also the ability to see this connection through all people, through our communities, the humanness that we all experience. I think with meditation, there's the great example of the humanness of the mind wandering. It's this natural human capacity, and yet we kind of beat ourselves up when the mind wanders, when in reality, just the act of bringing the mind back is really the practice. And so for me, it's also the clarity to be able to see the truth of this moment. My body awareness is a truth. Even in science, we tend to kind of lean onto these concepts as facts, and maybe 10 years down the road, those facts kind of shift a little sometimes and change a little, especially in parts of the textbooks that are growing and expanding rapidly. But this awareness in the moment is always my truth. There's always truth in that, whether science is changing or not. And so this awareness for me is really the foundation of, like I said, our healthcare and wellness. And really the beauty of yoga, I find too, is just that there are so many tools. That mindfulness can be in movement, it can be in asanas, it can be in meditation, it can be in breath work. I like to incorporate a lot of myofascial work. But what I love about it is it invites each person into the conversation of bringing themselves back together. And I've always really loved this. I loved working one-on-one with patients, but what I love even more about yoga is that I can give my patients or my students the tools to be able to be their own healthcare advocate and be able to make the shifts in themselves, which I think are so powerful. Not to say that there's not a very important place for medical providers, which I think serve a huge role, but to give them these ongoing tools to make those shifts, to not necessarily always be dependent on me. And for me, yoga is such a perfect self-care tool, and really where kind of all my work is kind of the books and my classes and everything really kind of revolves around offering tools for people to navigate their experience in their body and in the world.
I had goosebumps because I was like, this woman is speaking my language. I love it. I love that explanation of it. It's just beautiful. So I want to talk about yoga medicine. You have a wonderful business based on yoga medicine called Yoga Medicine. Tell me, what does yoga medicine mean?
Yeah, yoga medicine is really about the fusion of East and West, the fusion of science and research with traditional yoga practices. I really believe that's where we become most powerful. And I really believe, too, that, back years and years ago in the traditional practices with the traditional teachers, if we had known what we know now about the body and our physiology and anatomy, I think that would have also shaped the practices then. And I think it's our duty to keep shaping those practices and still really appreciate the traditional practices that we still can't explain. There's a lot that we can't explain and a lot of research that's not so great in the yoga world, but there's a lot that we have learned since then, even if it's just simple things about anatomy and physiology and how that relates to movement, or there's a lot of great research around meditation. And so I really think it's important that we use information from both sides of that to be able to make it a system that's really individualized. Our whole purpose is to create therapeutic practices that really meet the individual. And that can be sometimes when it's online, that's really educating and empowering the person to find what they need with those tools. And when it's in person, we're really training teachers to a much deeper level to be able to understand both the Western concepts of the body, anatomy and physiology and kinesiology and pathology, and as well as the Eastern side of the traditional practices. And I think both really lends an important aspect because the experiences from the practices that we know have been effective potentially for many, many years now, though they might need to shift a bit to meet our needs today, I think are still very important. So being able to bring in new research and medical findings to inform what we do, I think makes it a very powerful practice. And our faculty is really a mix of healthcare providers, from surgeons and MDs and anesthesiologists, PTs and PhDs, and we've got some researchers and scientists, and then, of course, an array of yoga teachers with very deep subject matter expertise and experience to provide these different outlooks, which is important, I think, to be able to see the body through different lenses as well, and really respect that there is this three-dimensional being. It's not just our anatomy and our physical body. It's not even just our organs and our physiology, our nervous system, or our mind, but it really is this whole complex and energetic system too. So what we really do at Yoga Medicine is provide a resource of really highly trained teachers with a deeper understanding of the body and the mind from this kind of more three-dimensional perspective that also embraces the power of our experience in the traditional practices at the same time.
Want to look deeper into your own health? Our virtual naturopathic team help people all over the world to shift their health and their lives. We offer a 90-minute online discovery and diagnostic session where you can find out where you're at, why things are happening, and what you need to do about it. Everyone is an individual, and sometimes it can help to have someone break down your journey and see where you need to head next. To find out more, go to theshiftclinic.com and click on Clinic. So one of our philosophies at Shift is that when you are in the right environment, you will heal, ultimately. And I think one of the misconceptions that people have, especially if they've grown up with the conventional medical model and they might be new to these kind of more holistic therapies, is that it's actually really difficult to heal, right? And I think that the reason for this is because things were so compartmentalized. When you're looking at problems from a Western perspective, it's very like, well, you have a reproductive problem, so you'll see a reproductive specialist. You have a thyroid problem, so you're going to see an endocrinologist. So you have all of these different specialists that don't really communicate with each other and look at stuff of the whole, and no wonder people have issues with healing.
Actually, one of my favorite analogies I use all the time is kind of the difference between really a more Western approach, which is more like the mechanic, which is this kind of separation of the parts. We go in and we fix a thing, versus the gardener, which is really trying to provide the most optimal environment, knowing that each plant's going to be different. Some will thrive in the worst possible environment, and some will struggle a little bit in the best possible environment. And as yoga teachers, as healthcare providers, as human beings, our job is to try and provide the best possible environment for that, and know that there's always some things that are out of our control, and that it's, our, I guess, life's work to find ways to embody both the struggles and the process of refining all of that, and the ups and the downs as well.
You don't have to be perfect for this to occur, right?
Yeah. I think perfection is just obviously an illusion, right? I mean, what is perfection? And in Chinese medicine, if you've seen that yin yang symbol, the implication is that the balance of yin and yang creates balance and health and optimal health in a very general sense. But the implication is that, like water, that yin yang symbol is constantly moving and shifting. So rather than thinking of health, and I'm sure you embrace this too, but rather than thinking of health as an end point, it's just an ongoing process, which we're constantly refining. There's just sometimes are easier than others.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the things that I like to say to my clients is like, we're not here to fix you. Your body's going to heal itself. We just need to give it what it needs ultimately to be on the journey. So it's not about being fixed. It's about just being on the journey and coming back to the conversation we had earlier around body awareness. Where are you at? Are you healing? Are you giving your body what it needs right now to allow that to happen?
It's so true. I was actually just talking to my husband about this. And, I think we have this idea that we're going to go to a doctor and, we're going to get fixed. And that's some people, like, they want to go to the doctor and they want to get a pill. And then there's, I think, a new wave of people that, know that I need to eat well and I need to exercise. But I think even then, we go and you might see a naturopath and an acupuncturist and a body worker and all the things, and eat well. But I think what I've learned, at least from my own experience and with patients too, is that it's like the layers. My husband's working on some stuff of his own, and it's like I just have to keep reminding him, like, you're making progress. Keep looking back and noticing where you are. But I think really powerful work on our health and our wellness does take time, and those are often the changes that stick around the longest too, when we can really kind of stick to something and let those changes happen. It's like our body's kind of brewing and steeping in, the environment of what we've added to the system, whether that's food or exercise or a million other things, or emotions, right? And so it's constantly adapting and shifting based on that. And so every input we make, I think, is so important, but it's a process. And I think the yoga is being okay with that process and making peace with the process and recognizing the brilliance in the process as well.
I love that. What are some signs that people might recognize that they're on the right track, that they're in the process, that they're doing the right things?
Well, I think the obvious ones are just in general feeling better. But for me, in TCM, we talk about it as the root and the branches. So the root, and you probably use this analogy too, but the root being the cause of dysfunction or disease, which could be a TCM pathology or a Western medical pathology, but it creates the branches, which are the symptoms. And so this idea that when we really get at the root, all those symptoms start to soften or dissolve or disappear. And a lot of times those are symptoms that I find that maybe we wouldn't have gone to a doctor for. Maybe your skin's dry, or, something little that you might not go to a doctor for, but you start to notice positive changes. I think any sort of positive changes is a good sign. And sometimes the more chronic issues we're dealing with just take longer. they take longer to really simmer and start to shift. They're kind of more deeply ingrained in our physiology and our nervous system potentially, that just takes a little bit more to shift it. But as long as things aren't going in a negative direction, aren't getting worse, I'm always happy as long as there are some positive changes there.
It's interesting. One of the sayings that my mentor taught me that really stuck with me is that you're not called a patient for nothing.
I love that.
I know.
It's true. And I think that's the hardest part of being a holistic doctor. You probably find this, any kind of holistic practitioner is half of our job is, one, reminding them how far they've come already, to keep encouraging them to keep going, because the really deep, powerful shifts do take time. And so we're kind of there just to kind of, in some ways, remind them to be patient and remind them of all the great things that are happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you were saying, just that progress, we forget so easily how far we've come when we get fixated on the things that are still wrong. So tell me about the stuff around women's health that you're doing, because I know that you've got an amazing women's health yoga teacher training, and I know that you've been working in this field for a very long time, like with your TCM stuff and with yoga. So tell me more about that.
Yeah. So sports medicine has always been my specialty, but when I was at Nike, I just all of a sudden started seeing a lot of fertility patients there. And so I went and took some training and took on a secondary specialty, and I really enjoyed it. I really love working with fertility personally. I had a whole wall of baby pictures, which was really fun. I mean, there's nothing more rewarding than helping a couple with something like that, I think. But for me, what's really interesting about it as well is that fertility is really about supporting a healthy cycle and stress management too, which is a big part of it. But to help the body do what it does best, what it does naturally. And so for me, it's not just about fertility, but it really applies to all females. It's just when it comes to fertility, people are very proactive versus, a lot of women maybe wouldn't go to the doctor for PMS or some smaller things that we might put up with, which is unfortunate because, we don't necessarily need to put up with those. But what's beautiful, I think, about women's health is it affects so much of us. Our hormones, as I think most women probably have experienced, are everything. They create literally how we feel. Our metabolism, our mood, our energy, our strength, our body aches, our temperature, our libido, our appetite, skin, we know periods and all sorts of other things. But for me, hormones are really such a big impact on how we feel and relate to the world and our mood and our mental state too. And what I love about TCM is that it really brilliantly makes sense of what we really in some ways have no clue about in Western medicine, like PCOS and endometriosis and infertility. There's so much that we don't know. And when you really get in, I love teaching this course, the TCM course for yoga, because we really get to dig into the fine tuning of the hormones and the fluctuations of the cycle and all of the details that are really nuanced from a TCM perspective to be able to really individualize this. So I've taken my TCM experience and layered that with the yoga practice to really provide very specific and individualized self-care tools for people depending on what's going on, and giving them some things that they can do on their own. And there's so many great intervention points for that.
It's amazing. And I've been having a few conversations with people around the different hormones in the menstrual cycle and how women can adjust their lifestyle and what they do to really harness what's going on at that particular time. Is there different tips that you give people around that, around different type of yoga that you might do or different ways that they can behave depending on what's going on?
Yes. And as you can imagine, as your work is too, there's obviously a lot more to it. But the first thing is, one, I think I really want to stress is that you don't need to just put up with it. So many women, I hear this all the time, like, oh, it's just PMS, like it's a normal thing. So many women believe that PMS is normal. And yet for those few days or maybe longer, if you think about how much some of these things affect our lives, or painful periods, And so first off, we don't need to just put up with it. That what's beautiful about the female physiology is that we have a really unique perspective into our physiology through our cycle. We get such a great picture of what's going on that men don't get. Obviously, they're a little less complex when it comes to sex hormones, but we get to really see that through the fluctuations of the cycle, and we know how much hormones affect us. So I think it's just such a great reminder, a great kind of, it's our body, like pain in some ways, is kind of like this reminder for us to do something about it. And with the female reproductive system, there's so many moving parts, and the timing is so essential. Our hormones, our stress, our food. But I think some of the big picture things, the takeaways, one I think that's really interesting is this whole myth about not exercising or doing yoga on your period. And to each his own. I think there are some women who just really feel uncomfortable and can't get themselves to move. And there are other ways to work with this. But a lot of it in the yoga tradition actually comes more from cultural taboos of women not being allowed in the temple during their period. And we've kind of translated that now into no one should ever do yoga on their period. It's this horrible thing, when the reality is that the blood vessels are actually constricting and dying in the endometrium there, and then popping up beneath it to push the endometrium out. And so circulation is so important during the period. Now, that doesn't mean for some women exercising is a great way to do that. And for others, they can't even, there's the thought of exercising sounds horrible to them. And so, I can find a way to create more circulation there. Maybe that's hot and cold therapy, or maybe that's some abdominal massage or MFR, myofascial release. But it's so important during the period to shed that entire lining to prepare for a healthy cycle. It's like trying to build a strong house without leveling the ground and laying the foundation. It really creates the foundation. My capacity to completely shed the lining there is really important for my body then to be able to create a more orderly endometrium later on, which sets the stage for every phase of the cycle after that. So I always try, one thing I think that's really helpful, especially for women with endometriosis or painful periods. This also applies to PMS as well, but especially for painful periods. I find it so important to find some way to create circulation through the periods so that they're really shedding that lining to set themselves up for a whole cycle. And then from a TCM perspective, the follicular phase right after the menses is really the rebuilding of the follicles and the lining, the endometrial lining. So more nourishing and introspective practices are great there. If you want to take a pause during your month to have more mild practices or exercises, it's a great time for restorative yoga or yin yoga, or just more relaxing types of yoga, more introspective practices like meditation, to support this as like a very nourishing part of the phases of the cycle where I really want the energy of my body really focused on building and creating there. And so obviously a little bit of movement is always good, I think. So some circulation.
Do you think that there are some challenges that women have that are unique to them because of the way that we live or because of their physiology or anything like that?
I definitely think each sex has its obstacles. And as women, we take a lot on and we put a lot more pressure on ourselves in some ways. And it's hard to say that. I try to shy away from generalities because I think everyone's so different. But I know for myself and a lot of the women that I've worked with, we tend to be our harshest critics. I saw a lot of these people who came in who were doing fairly good as far as eating pretty well and exercising, but they had a lot of these kind of mental hangups. And most of these were women. Everyone I can think of right now really was a woman, but it's this pressure we put on ourselves. And so for me, it was really about changing how we see ourselves in order to change basically everything we do, how we see the world, how we interact with the world, the food that we eat, the exercise that we do, because as we start to heal this relationship with ourselves and want to feel better versus want to beat ourselves up to look better, it has such a different outcome, not only on staying power and my ability to kind of stick with something and the health implications on that, but also on my experience of it, my appreciation and how I feel in the process. I find so many people, so many women especially, And I saw this a lot at Nike, would come into me thinking, oh, I've got to lose weight. I've got to get healthy, and usually they'd also be coming in to see me for something else too. They're like, oh, I have this shoulder pain and I need to lose weight, but I can't now because I can't work out, or hip pain or whatever that might be. We get so obsessed with that. And their first inkling would be to say, I have to run because of it, especially at Nike. And I just thought how silly that is, because there's so many other ways, they're going out there and I would say, do you like running? And a lot of time, most of the time it was no, they hated it, but they felt like they had to do that to be healthy. And, I think one of the big things for me is finding ways to love ourselves and extend our exercise and nutrition as a form of self-care rather than deprivation and beating ourselves up. And for me, that's such a huge part of what I do with people, is really planting those seeds of how am I approaching myself? What is my purpose behind this? To me, living a purposeful life, whatever that purpose may be, each of us has a very different purpose and different skills. But having that purpose-driven life is so important, so that, I can say, oh, wow, I am eating this thing to fill this void, or to make up for this time that I'm not spending with myself, or this sweetness that I'm lacking in my life somehow. And for me, that's the yoga. Kind of back to your question before, is being able to kind of turn on the light and notice these things. It's like, do I want to walk in my closet and pick out my clothes in the dark and hope it turns out okay? Or do I want to turn on the light and actually pick out something? And, it's very similar with our lives, is how do I purposely approach my food, my yoga, my exercise, my life, my work, as a way to serve myself, as a way to serve my community, as a form of self-care.
So this series is called The Shift. And what I would love to know is, what has been the biggest shift that you've made in your life, and what lessons did you gain from that?
I think for me, it's not just one, but it's all the little shifts for me that make the big changes that we see, the shifts that we make slowly over time, the things that really stick around. Yoga has been a really big tool for me for so many shifts in my life, whether that's asanas or meditation or breath or lifestyle changes that it instigates, and so many different things for myself, from physical. I had a disc herniation, which I learned so much from, and it was difficult to deal with, but I'm really grateful for. Mentally, my focus, my quality of life, obviously heartbreak and failure, and so many other things, and just simple things like being truthful with myself to find the perfect relationship, my husband, to be able to communicate in relationships, to manage and emotions, and be able to see clearly, the confidence to share my experience and train others, and really the energy to carry it all out and stay healthy. So I think it's all the little things for me that add up. And that's where I believe yoga as more of a mindset, this mindfulness that we take into our lives is really the powerful shift, I guess.
Can I ask a huge favor? If you like this podcast, the very best thing that you can do to support us is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or a rating on Spotify. This will help to push us up in the charts, which gets us into the ears of more people just like you that are also trying to make their shift. Is there anyone that stands out that you've worked with that has had a significant shift in their life as a result of working with you and adopting some of these principles and being more aware of what they're doing?
Yeah. I mean, gosh, there's so many. I've seen a lot of people with back pain. I think that's probably the most common thing that I've seen, and disc issues. And really, it's not always, we know from research too, even having a disc issue is not always the cause of pain. I remember a man who was 40, in his mid to late 40s, who clearly had disc symptoms, nerve pain with specific movements and bearing down, things like coughing and sneezing. But it wasn't until we really treated his burnout that he actually got better. So I gave him more restorative yoga and breath work to really reset more of the underlying system. And I really had to reset his expectations and his timeline, because that does take time to do. But I think that was an interesting one. I've worked with a lot of fertility patients. I remember one who would always come in and put her soda on my counter, this huge soda. And so I had to plant these little seeds first of empowerment, showing her how just a simple, and my tricky way, because, she didn't really want to give it up, but was really planting seeds of breath work for her to notice. Really, for me, breath work is, you can do it so quickly and really see the impact quickly. And, getting her to notice how these things impact her and planting those seeds of empowerment until one day I was so happy when she finally came and didn't have that darn soda. But I didn't force her, it wasn't about like depriving her or shaming her or making her feel bad. And at night could have been coincidence, but she did get pregnant very soon after. Obviously, there's a lot more to that. But then, obviously there's all sorts of different things. What I love about yoga and teaching groups too, is that often we plant these seeds and often questions to how we see ourselves, the world around us. And you never know who or how it impacts someone, whether that's a group class or an online class. And really, it just affects us in so many different ways. And so I love asking questions.
Let's say somebody who's listening has never tried yoga before, or they're in that camp that we were talking about, which is like, I just hate yoga, I'm uncomfortable in it, or I'm bored, or whatever it is. Where do you recommend that they start?
I really think there's something out there for everyone. And so I recommend, it's like going to a massage therapist and saying, I don't like massage, which maybe there are some people, like my dad actually hates massages, but he's 85. So it's a different generation that didn't involve a lot of touch. But I think for yoga, it's really about finding what works for you. And this is why I love teaching yoga for athletes, because it was really yoga for tight people. And it was like it gave them permission to not have to look like the bendy girl next to them or not to have to touch their toes. And so, sometimes that's a community you like, sometimes that's a teacher you like, or a style you like, or, it could also just be finding little short practices that you like because they can fit in your schedule. And, maybe you're already aware of or convinced that it might be helpful for you for some reason or another, that you really want to fit it in there. So sometimes it's just about finding something that fits into your schedule. But ultimately, I think it's about decoding our biology and finding what works for you. And we can't always measure that, but we can look at the subjective experience of our awareness in our body, of our quality of life, of our mood and how we interact and look at how it affects us. And so I really recommend just experimenting until you find something, and knowing that there's so much out there. There's so many different styles and teachers. It's a big part of the reason why we launched our online platform too, is to really provide that to people, because it doesn't always have to, especially now, be something where you go in person. Though I think if you are working with illnesses or injuries, it is really nice to have a teacher who can help you. We have a find a teacher resource too, which is great for people who want someone specific. But I think online practices can be really wonderful in that circumstance, because they are so much easier to fit in our schedules. You can find 20 to 30-minute classes, maybe even 10-minute classes, short meditations that are really easy. We've got like a little button you can push to add it to your calendar. So I like to go in on Sunday or Monday and kind of plan out my week. And what I love about our site is really that it's all really purposeful practices that are outcome oriented. So it's not about getting better at yoga or doing better yoga poses, but really about feeling better and supporting what our bodies are really made to do, which is adapt and be resilient. And they really want to keep bringing us back to homeostasis. They're trying so hard, even though we can't see it. And so finding ways to support that natural inclination towards this capacity to thrive. And we've got these they're kind of like Wi-Fi bars, I always compare them to. So you can see how much movement is in each one, how much instruction, how much strength, how much. We've got range of motion classes that are more of a focus, or how much meditation. You can kind of see exactly what's in it. So that I find for me doing yoga online, some of the downfall is, you just don't really know what you're going to get. And then sometimes you feel disappointed because you're like, oh, I really wanted to relax, but that was a lot of moving or whatnot. So it really helps you decode it. And our site is really dedicated to educating. So we've got little, what we call monthly doses where people can learn a little bit. It was one of the things I loved about teaching locally is the students who studied with me over time really started to get an arsenal of tools and awareness in their body. And I really wanted to offer that to our students. And it's really easy because we have what we call weekly wellness, which is a 3-dimensional approach to your wellness. And it's based on the U.S. Department of Health's guidelines to minimize chronic illness and cancer and brain health and things like that. And so you can get some movement, some strength. We look at connective tissue health, but we also look at physiology and organs and the nervous system and things like sleep and so much more that as a human, I really appreciate kind of having that plug and play resource to be able to make it really simple too.
I have one last question for you. If you could give just one piece of advice to someone that wants to make a shift in their health or their life, what would it be?
Well, I will say I am a Nike girl still at heart. So I think for me, I'm definitely a just do it person. Do it now. Do one thing now. And I really recommend starting small. I get people who come into me all the time. They want these like long home practices that they can do. And I always insist you get one pose to start with, and then we grow over time. So you don't have to feel like you do it all at once, because these patterns we create are so important. So what is that one thing that you can do today? Maybe it's something simple like noticing your breath while you're brushing your teeth. I think that's a really great mindfulness practice of, can I just be an observer? You know, we start to notice the breath and then we want to change it. We want to regulate it, but can I just notice it like an observer? Or maybe that's 5 minutes of yoga a day, or maybe that's drinking more water, or stop eating X, or stop feeding a negative relationship. I think it's really interesting too to notice where you put your energy. How do you spend your energy currency? Because our energy literally is a currency, and you are choosing every moment how you spend it. So I would call people listening to this to think of one thing that you can do today, right now, and start to make a new pattern. And remember that health is an ongoing process. As we mentioned, it's not an endpoint. But I do need to experience. I need to peel away the layers. And yoga is a great foundation of being able to really see clearly what's helping, and watching how everything influences you physically, mentally. Some we have control over and some we don't. So steer what you can and let go of what you can't, because stress is ultimately about control in many ways. Like, what can you control to steer your life in a new direction? And that could be, again, really simple. It could be food. It could be buying an air filter. It could be your relationships, or stress, or mindfulness, or yoga, or meditation. But everything we do or don't do is influencing how we feel in this moment. So what can I do now and commit to over time? And I think on that too, we talked about living a purposeful life too. My motto is always, how can I help? I mentioned, and I really think this purposeful approach is important. So I always encourage people to keep refining. I'm always questioning this. What am I really passionate about? What am I actually really good at naturally? And what does the world need from me? And where is it that those three things intersect? And for me, that's in yoga, we call this our dharma, or our purpose in life. And it's constantly changing in my experience personally. And so I think it's always important as a human to keep refining our purpose here, because it brings meaning and depth to our lives. And so I would say those two things. Pick one thing you can do now and keep refining that purpose, and questioning and listening, and leaning into the process.
Thank you so much for joining me on The Shift, Tiffany.
Thanks for having me.
There was some great information in this episode, so let's make sure we've gotten the key points and what action you can take as a result of this. Body awareness is pivotal to having awareness about our health and well-being. Personally, I believe regular yoga helps so much when it comes to this. I find that when movement, and mindful movement in particular, are not practiced, my patients are much less aware of what is happening for them and can't read the cues of illness early without this deeper connection to themselves. You can fuse the East with the West. You can use both traditional healing practices and also modern medicine. There can sometimes be an us versus them mentality. But in today's world, the reality is that there needs to be a role for both. My vision is to change the face of healthcare, and it is my mission in this lifetime to have a healthcare system available to all that includes natural therapies such as acupuncture, naturopathy, and other alternative therapies as part of the core healthcare system. It's a huge mission, I know, but I think that eventually we will get there. My favourite thing that Tiffany said in this episode was that we should find ways to love ourselves and extend our exercise and nutrition as a form of self-care rather than deprivation and beating ourselves up. This is so true. I have never met a person that fully loves themselves on all levels that doesn't naturally look after themselves well. So perhaps the aim is to cultivate self-love rather than to lose weight or eat healthier or whatever it might be for you. Learning is great, but action is better. Here are a few things that you can do as a result of this conversation in order to help you shift your health and your life. I want you to seriously look at creating a practice for yourself with conscious movement. Yoga is such a great one, but it could be Pilates, Tai Chi, dance, or even just allowing 10 minutes each day to stretch and move your body. This is more important than you think, so please don't overlook it. Next, are you taking a holistic approach to your wellness? Could you need more people on your team? I think that sometimes we're looking for that quick fix or that one person that's going to solve all of our problems. Our modern health issues are complex because of the way we live our lives and the many, many factors involved. Don't be afraid to blend the East with the West, as Tiffany recommends. Lastly, as Tiffany says, just do it. We spend so much time procrastinating and doing mental gymnastics before we join that studio or do that online yoga class. We really have to be brave and just jump in and start if we want to make a shift. Thank you so much, Tiffany Cruikshank, for sharing her knowledge with us on The Shift. If you like this episode, please let us know by sharing on social media, tagging Tiffany and myself, Katherine Maslen, or The Shift Clinic so that we can hear what you have to say. You can find out more about Tiffany and the good work that she does at yogamedicine.com or come and say hello on social media. In our next expert series on The Shift, we have Dr. Jay Davidson, best-selling author and a specialist in Lyme disease and stealth pathogens. It's super interesting and I can't wait to share it with you.
Coming up on The Shift.
Mitochondria is the key for chronic illness healing. Research has shown that even EMFs, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cell phone towers, these things will damage our mitochondria. I'm like, Heather, get over here, and she comes over and just looks at me wide-eyed, wants to look away, but really intrigued. What is it? I'm like, these are parasites. The underlying reason why we have a modern-day parasitic epidemic is because there's a modern-day toxicity epidemic.
This series is a production of The Shift Clinic. Hosted by Katherine Maslen. Music and sound design by Shade Furlong. Thank you to all of our experts. For more details on them, go to theshiftclinic.com.
We can be. We must be.
The first generation to end extreme poverty.
The generation most determined to fight injustice
and inequality.
The generation that saves the planet
from climate change.
And this is how we will get it done.
The global goals. A 15-year plan for everyone, everywhere.
With no one left behind.
The global goals are a framework that collectively help us
support the health of our people
and the planet.
At Shift, we are ambassadors for the global goals.
This project supports global goal number 6.
Clean water and sanitation.
Every time you listen
to an episode of The Shift,
we provide a day's access to clean water
for a human in need
in Malawi, Africa.
Water is the foundation to health, and we believe
every human should have access
to clean, healthy water.
So please share this podcast wide
and keep tuning in
so we can impact those who need it the most.